Welcome to Excel Tips. My name is Neale Blackwood, and in this video we're going to look at some data visualization tips and tricks for Excel. Now, data visualization allows you to present data using charts, conditional formats. We're even going to look at emojis at the end. And what that does, it allows you to create visualizations that get across information fairly quickly and easily. And so part of what we're going to look at now is how we can better present information in Excel. We're going to use this data set. So this is what's called a formatted table in Excel. I've created it using this format as table icon. We've got data from the 1st of July 21 through to the end of October 23, and what we want to do is create some reports based on this data. Initially, we're going to look at October 23 and compare that to the same month in the previous financial year, so October 22. I've already created the structures that will allow us to build the charts. Basically, you need table layouts. That's the best layout to build a chart from. I've got some formulas in this file. So you can have a look at those formulas if you download the file. Okay, so here's the structure we're going to use. So initially, when you're building your tables, make sure you have the correct format for the numbers, because the number format in the table will flow through to the chart. And that even occurs after the chart has been created. It's easier to modify the values in the table than it is in the chart. And so by changing it in the table, it automatically flows through into the chart. Okay, so I'm going to select the range A7 down to C12. I'm going to click on Insert. And these days, we have recommended charts as a large icon there. And when we click on that, Excel has a look at your data and it comes up with some ideas. So you can see those ideas by clicking on these entries here. Actually, none of those are really any good except for the top one. So we're going to go with that, but we'll start with this. So there we go. So there's our first chart. So we can see the comparison. Now, a note on colors. So blue and orange are fairly safe colors when it comes to color blindness, which affects about 1 in 12 men, and it's only about 1 in 100 women. But red-green is the common sort of issue with color blindness. So blue and orange work out quite well. Another color that's good is gray. This chart has a problem. Let's give it a title. So I can just type in sales dollars. The problem we've got is that when you're looking at date type data, you typically go from left to right. But when you're building reports, you typically have the most recent number closest to the labels. And what that does in a report, it makes sense, but in a chart, it doesn't. So you can see here that it looks like our online sales have dropped. But when you read the legend, you find out that the orange is actually the previous year's sales. So they've actually increased. So what we need to do is basically flip the report, and that's quite easy to do by changing these around. So in this version of it, I've got the October 22 showing first. So let's do that again. So insert recommended. We'll just go with that top chart. There we go. This time I'm going to link the chart title to a cell, which is going to be A6. So that has the advantage that you can put a formula in there and create a fairly dynamic title, which we'll see in a later example. Few things I'm going to do here is I'm going to get rid of the grid lines. That's usually the first thing I do when I create a chart. The grid lines are in there as a default. I tend to remove them because they're one of the things that adds what some people call noise to a chart. So it's a visual cluttering of the chart. You want to try and remove as much from a chart as possible while still having all of the information that you do need. And the grid lines tend to be something that you don't really need. When you're looking at a column chart, for example, you're not really trying to figure out what this value is compared to that value. You're just looking for relationships and comparisons there. we can see quite quickly that online sales have gone up fairly dramatically. Manufacturing and other have dropped slightly. Wholesale slightly increased, and retail's about the same. So that's what you're trying to pick up from a chart. You're not trying to figure out what this chart is, what this value is exactly. If you are, there are techniques we can use, which again we'll look at a little bit later. With a comparison from one month to another, and by the way, we're looking at a comparison of 1 month to another month, but this could be comparing actuals to budget, actuals to forecast, those sort of things. It's just comparing one metric to another metric and figuring out what's happened. So whilst it's accurate, it's not really giving you the information you're after, because what you're probably after is what is the value of this difference, which is like a variance. So let's have a look at another table that we're going to build. And this time we're going to look at, as I mentioned, the variance. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to select two separate ranges. So I'm going to select A7 down to A13. I'm going to include the total. Hold my control key down and select D7 down to D13. So with that range selected, I'm going to click Insert, Recommended. Let's see what we've got. Yeah, that's pretty much what I want. That's the variance. And that is showing me probably a more useful chart. It's showing you the difference between last year and this year. So we can see quite easily that the online sales have really made a difference. And even in total, because we're plotting a variance here, we can even include the total. Now, one of the issues you'll get, and I'll just drag this down because I've got a heading there. I've built a heading with a formula. So I'm going to move this over here. I'm going to click on equals and click on that cell. And so now we've got our accurate description there. Again, I'm going to remove my grid lines. I'm just using my delete key to move that. One of the issues here is that because we've got some negatives, we can't read these headings on the axis very well. Luckily, Excel allows you to move these headings lower. So what we're going to do is click on the axis, right click it and say Format. And on the labels area, there's an option for low. So that's going to put it below the chart. And that's much easier to read. One thing I might also do is actually remove the line from that. So if you go to the paint can and line, we can say no line. And that gives you a fairly clean chart. So as you can see, retail changed very little. But the big change in online is showing us that we've made a big change in our total. And we have the ability to plot the total because we are looking at variances rather than the actual total values. Something else you can do with the variance is, instead of plotting the dollars variance, which is important, you could also plot the percentage. So you might be interested in the percentage variance. So let's have a look at that. So here we go. I've added the percentage to that. So I'm going to include the total again. So A7 down to A13, and this time it's E7 down to E13. Insert, Recommended, and again it's that very first chart. There we go. A couple of things. I'm going to do those same changes. I'll get rid of my grid lines. I'm going to move I'll make this a little bit wider so the names fit in a bit better. Click on there. We can go back to this icon on the end here. This one is typically the one you use for most changes, and it's labels. And we want to change that to low, which gives us that. And we also want to get rid of that line. So I'll go back to here. No line. Fairly clean. Now I'm going to make one more change to this, again, as an example of some data visualizations that you might want to use. Rather than have the axis on the left hand side, I'm just going to delete it. I'm going to add the labels to these. So right click, add data labels, and there we go. So we can see now the movement as a percentage. And as we can see, it was a large percentage for online sales, but that had a 6% impact on the total sales. dollar variance, percentage variance, they're both useful data visualizations rather than just comparing actuals and budgets or October 22 to October 23. Plotting the variance can be a useful data visualization. Space may be at a premium. So Excel has a special type of chart called a sparkline chart. So they're only very small charts, but they plot one data series. So let's say we want to plot this variance, and I'm going to use a single cell to plot it. I'm going to click in that cell, which is E6. I'm going to click on Insert. About just over halfway across are the sparklines, and I'm going to use the column. Now I need to tell it the range, so there's just a single data range. That's it. Click OK. I don't include the heading there. And there we go. So that's in a cell. Now the cell doesn't have any a legend or any headings in it. So what I've done is I've sort of created a heading by using one of a couple of Excel's functions. So these are the shortened versions of these customer categories, so manufacturing, other, etc. So the way I've done that is I've used the left function to grab the left entries from the range A8 to A13, including the total. So that's the first three characters. And then I've used a new function called text join, which then joins all of those names together, and it puts a space. Actually, I think there's two spaces here. So I played around with this to see if I could line them up, and it worked pretty well. So this is a little technique you can use to put headings underneath your Sparkline charts if you need to. And again, it's using text join and the left function. And I've got two spaces in here to sort of spread them out a little bit so it matches. If I widen this, you'll see I would need to include some extra spaces. So basically, you sort of make the width to match where the headings are a bit, and you can move them around. So that makes the width determines the size of the chart because the chart is in the cell. So you need to sort of just play around with it a little bit to get those headings to line up with the columns there. Okay, so that's a Sparkline chart. You can do multiple Sparkline charts. You can add Sparkline charts to a table, for example, if you wanted, if you were plotting data in a table. Another way to show the difference between two different metrics is using a waterfall chart. Now, waterfall charts are also known as a bridge chart. I actually prefer the term bridge chart. Waterfalls take a total and then they show you the movements and then they end up at another total. So we're going to have the total for October, and these are the movements. So these are the variances, and then we end up at our total for October 23. So what we're going to do is select that range. That's sort of the layout you need to use to create a waterfall chart. So you have a total, the movement, and then the other total. So we select that range, and I'm going to click on Insert, Recommended. Now in this case, it doesn't come up with what we need. So if you click on All Charts, and then you can click on Waterfall, and there it is. It's not correct yet, so let's click OK. So at the moment, it's actually treating the two totals as movements. So what we're going to do is click on that once, click on it twice, right click and say Set as Total, and do the same here. Click on it once, click on it again, so it's only highlighted by itself, and then Set as Total. And there we have the waterfall. And again, I'm going to get rid of the grid lines, as I tend to do. And as you can see, it's using blue as the increase and orange as the decrease, and the totals are grey. And we can change the title here, Sales Dollars. And there we can see it. So a waterfall chart, also known as a bridge chart, shows the movement between two metrics. Okay, so far we've been looking at data visualizations for a few entries, but let's say we wanted to look at a list of customers. So these are all our customers in alphabetical order, and we've worked out the variance. Now what we might want to do is to add to this table a small chart that will show us the variance visually. And the feature that does that is called conditional formatting. So I'm going to select this range. So that's the variance range. Click on conditional formatting, and I'm going to use what are called data bars. Now it sort of looks like you've got lots of options here, but in effect there's either what's called a gradient fill, which we're looking at now, or a solid fill. Let's have a look at that. And now you can see the solid fill. I prefer this solid one, so I'm going to click on that. And as you can see, it's using color, it's using blue and red. So blue is a favorable increase, whereas red is a unfavorable decrease. And so the idea is you can scroll down here and pick up the values. So the size of the bar represents how large a particular variance is. So the largest variance positive here is 41,000. You can see how large the value is in comparison to the rest of the variances. So it can be a handy data visualization to use. So another way to look at that is maybe instead of having to look at every row, for example, we might have some parameters that we want to apply. And let's say we only want to look at the values that are either above 25% favorable or below 25% unfavorable. You could have different numbers for each one. I'm just simplifying it using the same value for both. What this allows us to do is sort of like exception reporting. So what I'm going to see here are just some icons. So instead of using the data bars, I'm going to use icons. Now, from experience, to get the right icon, it's often easier to use a formula to populate the column. In this case, I'm just going to use the numbers 1, 2, and 3. Based on those numbers, we are going to apply the format. So, and it's going to be the icon in this case. So what I'm saying is if the difference is greater than F7, which is our, so that's the percentage that I've entered. So if it's greater than that, I'm going to put the number 3 in. So that will be a good thing. If the value is less than or equal to minus that number, so this is the bad one, it's going to be a 1, and everything else is going to be a 2. Now the 2 I'm not interested in. Okay, it's only the 1 and the 3. So the 2 is in the middle, and that's between 25% unfavorable and 25% favorable. So I've deemed those to be, I'm not interested in them, so I don't want to see an icon for them. And so this formula we can then convert into an icon. So I'm going to select the range, conditional formatting. We're going to use icon sets, and I'm going to use I'll use the colored icons. Now it automatically puts them in correctly, but again, I don't want to see this sideways one. So I'm going to go back into there and manage the rules and double click on it, and we can edit it. First thing I'm going to do is I only want to see the icon. I'm not really interested in the 1, 2, 3. And what I'm going to do in the middle here is I'm going to change this to a number, and that's going to be greater than or equal to 3. This one I'm going to change to a number and change that to 2. And I'm going to say no icon for the middle one. And so anything less than 2 is going to have the down icon. And so those settings are going to allow me to show just the icon. Now, when you're using conditional formatting, you either got to click OK or apply to see a change. So there we go. And so you only now need to really look at the icon rows. You could also add in the other conditional format there if you wanted and use both of them together. And so the icons can then allow you to pick up which ones you need to be looking at. Okay, now maybe the icons aren't what you want, and so you want to use something different. Recently, Excel has been updated so that you can use emojis in formulas. And there's an example. So the emoji you can enter. So there's an example of an emoji. It has to be in quotation marks. So that's the thumbs up and that's the thumbs down. And I've used a conditional format in here to basically determine the color. So normally it would just be black. So that's the standard color for the emojis, but you can use a conditional format to change the color. And if we select all of those, we can have a look at the conditional format here. So we've got, if the cell value is, as you can see, thumbs down, it goes red. If the cell value is thumbs up, it goes green. Maybe I should change that to blue. So let's go to the top there and change that to blue rather than use the red and the green. So we can double click on it to edit it and then change the format here. So cell value is equal to, we can format and let's make it a blue. Okay and okay. And again, nothing happens until you hit apply. So now we have blue and red as our colors. Now to insert an emoji, what you can do is you have to use the keyboard shortcut with the Windows key and the full stop. So Windows and full stop. And that brings up the emojis. You have your recent ones, and then you can use these headings down the bottom to identify other emojis that you may want to use. So let's chuck a skateboard in as an example. So that puts the skateboard into the cell. And if you increase the font, for example, on that one, you'll see that the skateboard gets bigger. To use it in a formula, you need to put the quotation marks around it, something like that. And that uses it in a formula, as we've done here. Whoop, right at the top. So emojis offer you a little bit more flexibility in terms of showing a different shape or image for particular items. If we go back to our icons, the most number of icons you can have are 5 for different things. And if you needed more than that, then you could maybe use emojis to achieve. If you needed 7, for example, then you could use that. So there's all these different ones. So we've got little charts, we've got stars. I would avoid these shapes simply because they only use color, and it's better to use something that has an icon and color. That way, if someone does suffer from color blindness, then at least there's an icon that can help them identify what it means. Whereas these colors can be really hard to pick up if you are colorblind. Okay, so I've covered a lot of different areas of data visualization. Hopefully you've picked up some useful tips that you can apply to your charts. And thanks for watching.